Tremendously honored, again, to have a bipartisan panel at lunch, a four-corner panel, meaning members, representatives from the Senate and House, from the Democratic and Republican caucuses, some of the most important people in health policy, but also fiscal policy, and really folks who help create and facilitate and lead a better community for us all in Washington State. So I want to invite them to the stage. Senator Andy Billig, the Deputy Minority Leader, Representative Timm Ormsby, the Chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Senator Ann Rivers, the Chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee, and Representative Joe Schmick, the Ranking Member on the House Healthcare and Wellness Committee. Let's give them a round of applause. So, Representative Schmick, let me start with you. I appreciate you sat with me for a podcast, and we had quite a bit of conversation yesterday. Why don't you sort of give us a rundown on how you think health policy is going in Washington State? How is health care going in Washington State? And how does that inform the work you're doing in the House Health and Wellness Committee?
I think that this year it's going to be about what do we do with the expansion population. I think everyone's concerned about that, especially those folks who are receiving care that the state is responsible for. And it's the uncertainty from the other Washington right now that I think is really driving the bus.
Yeah.
And it makes it difficult because we don't know what we're doing. And frankly, even to plan ahead is hard to do because what's going to be there, what's not going to be there. Before we didn't know about the cost sharing portion, for the lower income people to help them pay their out-of-pocket costs and co-pays. Well, they seem to be talking about that, but right now we still don't know. And I think that that's a big issue for our state. There's a lot of people that receive coverage through the expansion, and the future they're in, I think, is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Senator Rivers, you lead the policy committee in the Senate on health care. Is there, or maybe sketch for us the types of conversations that are taking place related to how the state would respond if there's major changes in federal policy, or how the state might move forward independent of major policy changes at the federal level? In other words, can Washington State lead on its own regardless of what happens in DC?
Washington State has always been a leader in healthcare. Recall that we had Basic Health Plan, which was part of the foundational work for the Affordable Care Act. So it's always been a priority for us, and I think it remains a priority. Leaders are meeting, the focus has changed somewhat because we had the ACA implementation group, and now leaders are going to be meeting to talk about the path forward and what our new system is really going to look like. So it's something that has been top of mind, will remain top of mind, and just lots of activity going on surrounding that.
Yeah. Senator Billig, had this last legislative session took 193 days. There were some big things on the agenda, particularly related to McCleary and education funding, but also just getting a budget passed in general, not to mention other things like mental health and other issues. Can you imagine reliving the 2017 session if the Affordable Care Act had been repealed in, say, February? I mean, that would have just sort of, seems to me that would have sent things into chaos in Olympia. How ready is the legislature to respond generally to the fiscal and policy implications of major federal change?
I think we had a hard enough time just dealing with the idea that it could happen, that if actually it had happened, I think it would have been a snowball that would have been very difficult in light of the other challenges that we were dealing with. I think that we're going to be able to deal with whatever it is that comes our way. We've shown that we've been able to tackle hard problems in a bipartisan way, especially when it comes to healthcare. But I mean, this challenge, it really comes down to revenue. I mean, that's the issue. So we've got this, these very important services, these constitutionally and federally mandated things that we need to do, education, which Senator Rivers and I spent, well, I really like Senator Rivers a lot, but we spent way too much time together negotiating the McCleary package. All the 8 of us that did that were, it was really a challenge, and I think we're going to have a similar type of challenge there. But what it comes down to is not, we're going to be able to agree on the policy. We're going to be able to come together and say, this is the right thing for the people of Washington State. And where the rub is going to be is, how do we pay for it? And are we going to be able to not only to invest and raise that revenue, but to do it in a way that's fair, that doesn't make our most regressive tax system in the country more regressive. And so that's what I hope, is that whatever our challenges are, if it's healthcare or if it's something else, that we solve it in a way, and if it has to do, if it costs money, that we invest in that revenue plan in a way that not only creates the revenue necessary, but that makes our system more fair.
Yeah. Representative Ormsby, let me ask you, you've got as chair of the Appropriations Committee, you've got a centrally important role on this question. Come from a labor background. There are a number of labor advocates, particularly at the Education Association, who might argue that while this may have fixed McCleary, i.e. the state versus local appropriation of education dollars, this still has not fully funded education. And as such, we need more revenue into education. How would you respond to that line of thinking?
Well, I think we've got a 4-year plan. And I just want to remark about the work that was done with McCleary, the education funding work group that Senators Billig and Rivers were involved in. That was a tough nut to crack. The fact that those 8 folks agreed on a policy is telling about the process and how we go about it. So that's a 4-year plan. If I'm not mistaken, over those 4 years, it's $7.3 billion, give or take a few $100 million, increase in our K-12 spending. And I think, you know, school districts, now that school has started, are beginning to sort out, and each school district, 295 of them, are all different. And that was the challenge of, you have a central funding model and local control within the school districts, and those are 2 trains on the same track heading in opposite directions, towards each other, kind of. So so as far as quantifying what the liability is, I think we're going to find out in due time, and I think we proved to be nimble enough to make those adjustments, both on the policy side, the spending side, and as Senator Billig said, on the revenue side. And those things this is a fluid business. We didn't check that box for all eternity. We did what we felt would be answer the court's order. We'll see what the court has to say about school construction, for example, because we don't have a capital budget yet. But on the policy side, have we met what the court laid out? And they're going to be the ultimate arbiters on this. So I think the first indication will be when the court responds.
So Senator Billig, walk us through that court response, some of the contingencies or event possibilities there. A, do we have a window or a time frame about when we might get a response from the Supreme Court? B, if they say that either the operational increase is not enough, or as a result of the capital budget not getting passed, that there's not enough investment in capital projects like new school construction, what are the possible steps the Supreme Court might take, in your opinion? I know there's a wide range of theories. What do you think are the most likely possibilities?
Well, I left my black robe at home, so you know, the Supreme Court, I mean, they've got a wide range of possible responses. First, on the timing, October, I think it's 23rd, late October, are going to be oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court, and so the decision from them will come sometime after that. I'll tell you what I think is likely and also what I sort of think is reasonable. I think it is reasonable, would be reasonable for them to say, this is a solid plan and a big step in the right direction. It appears to meet the sort of technical legal requirements of full funding of basic education in terms of the compensation, because that's really the crux of the McCleary decision, is that the state pay for all of the basic education salaries, and that those salaries don't come from the local funds. I think there's a good chance they're going to say we've met that requirement. I would not be surprised if they said, however, that while we met that requirement and they'll remove the contempt order, that they are going to keep jurisdiction active and oversight of the case to make sure that the implementation goes the way it is. And I think the one piece, because I really believe that we did meet those requirements, but the one piece where I think our plan may have come up short is the long-term sustainability, because there's a 1% cap on property taxes, and that cap is suspended for 4 years as part of the McCleary bill. And when that cap comes back into effect, as it's supposed to in current law after 4 years, I think that there is a chance the court is going to say that is a sustainability problem, and legislature, you need to figure out a solution to that. So that's a possible response.
Senator Rivers, do you quarrel with any of that set of observations? Do you have a different opinion?
No, we are very like-minded in many of the thoughts that Senator Billig put forward, but I have since come to know that there's a lot of concern because property values continue to rise in Washington State, because as it turns out, it's a pretty phenomenal place to live. And Clark County is growing rapidly, and so we're watching our property values creep up, which of course means greater revenues are coming in. And so certainly there will be a time when that will level off, but for right now, I mean, for my part, I'm tired of trying to guess what the Supreme Court's going to come up with. Every time I think I got it figured, I'm completely wrong, and so I'm just waiting like everyone else to find out what they say and see if they send us back to the drawing board, or if they say, oh, thank God, we don't have to talk about this anymore.
Yeah. Representative Ormsby, I'll give you the easy, short question, and then ask a more nuanced one to follow. This is a sort of bipartisan panel, a multi-cameral or bicameral panel. We're sort of in a day where we might reflect on the goodness of humanity. Tell me something positive about President Trump.
He's got a lot of energy.
And tell me what you think. I'm coming for a question for you next, Representative Schmick. What is it like governing as a senior member of the House?
Are you referring to my age?
As the chair of the Appropriations Committee, during this time of federal frustration, federal policy frustration?
We had discussions going back more than a year ago, knowing that we were going to come to this this difficult issue of funding education. And there was all this speculation about what would happen at the national level, particularly after the November election. We made a conscious decision to deal with things in real time, because the speculation can exhaust you. It becomes kind of paralysis by analysis, because you can't possibly factor in all the contingencies that you may see. So there was a lot of high breathing going on during some of those ACA votes about what indication was that going to give us on the policy and funding side. Speaking for the House Democrats, I think we're going to deal with the issues that come before us as they come before us. And we can do some preparation in general terms, but the specific is always on policy. It's always in the details. And we have to have some certainty about knowing it before we can start crafting solutions. So it's always in the back of our head, but I think we're going to deal with what we know to be true today. And as it changes, we're going to be fleet of foot and nimble enough to make adjustments as we need to.
Yeah. Representative Schmick, in the sort of vein of positivity, tell us something that you admire about Governor Inslee.
I think that for the issues that he cares about, he's very passionate.
Reasonable, he has a lot of energy, right? How would you frame or describe the impact of federal politics on the state legislature, if at all? I mean, do you find that the stuff that's happening, as I call it, in the air war of cable TV is influencing the ability to work collaboratively either within your caucus, with the House Democrats, or with the Senate?
The issue of always having to respond, and oftentimes, it's like if we tied both your hands behind your back and said, go pound that nail. Oftentimes, those are the parameters that are put upon us by the federal government. We've talked a lot about innovation. At dinner last night, we talked about the issue needing to have a lot of motivation or innovation. But if you've got both hands tied behind your back, it's sometimes very hard to innovate. I think that if you have a willing agency in the federal DC, there's a lot more options you have. Otherwise, it's sometimes very difficult. I think I work with Representative Cody. I think we have a good working relationship. I also work with Senator Rivers and Senator Cleveland. And I think that the communication and working together has never been an issue. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to, we don't always agree, trust me. But the fact of working together to deal with these things, I think that we've done a good job of that.
Mm-hmm. Representative Ormsby, let me ask you this question. If Senator or Representative Cody were to step down, not run for re-election in 2018, and if Representative Chop, Speaker Chop, were to not run for re-election in 2018, while that is only 2 members of the current 50-member caucus, that is probably more than 4% of the total institutional knowledge, right? Those are long-standing senior figures. I think they both came in 1994. What does the Democratic caucus in the House look like if those members leave?
You know, it's always going to be a challenge when you have turnover, and that includes staff as well. And it turns out until such time as we outlaw free will, people get to do what's in their best interest. I think it would be a gut punch to lose Representative Cody. I saw the look on Senator Rivers' face, slight horror, even though we're talking about people coming at solutions from different standpoints. It is not a stretch to say that Eileen is probably the strongest health policy legislator nationally. That's how well respected and how knowledgeable she is. We're working on a plan to keep her around, and it could involve extortion. We're not certain. For Speaker Chop, and you mentioned that, you know, institutional knowledge is huge. And being politically savvy is really important because that's where you're looking to your leadership to provide. So our philosophy is next up. Who's next up? And I think the process is such that we're going to learn, we're going to discover about ourselves what our strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that's a huge motivation for why we show up all the time, to get that information, discern it, and make an informed judgment. So next up, you know, it's just like somebody's on injured reserve or someone's not there. Somebody has to step up, and I think all 4 caucuses have demonstrated the ability to replace and step in for folks that had, you know, been an integral part, and we've sorted it out, and the process lends itself to those resolutions.
I want to welcome some of your questions. I know we've got microphones that are floating around with some of our volunteers. And again, make sure for our volunteers that your hands are up so I can see you if you have someone that wants to ask a question. Senator Rivers, let me ask you about the Healthcare Authority as an agency that your committee works with closely, provides some oversight for. Those state agencies now are submitting supplemental budget requests to the governor's office now to be considered as part of a supplemental budget that'll likely come in the December timeframe. So the agencies are already gearing up towards the legislative session in 2018. What do you think about, what are your observations about the Healthcare Authority, and what are we likely to see in the legislative session in 2018, if anything? It's still early in terms of legislative development. I know you guys just finished. Lord help you all, you were in there forever. Thank you for your service. But it's coming again, whether we like it or not. Observations on the Healthcare Authority in the 2018 session?
So as I travel around the United States to healthcare conferences and what have you, I hear our healthcare authority is the envy of the United States, of all the places that have healthcare authorities. Ours is doing very, very well. That doesn't mean by any stretch that it's perfect, and there couldn't be some improvements that could be made. They've also recently felt some turnover with longstanding leadership departing, and so they're in the process of fixing that. I am anxious for the new Healthcare Authority Director to be appointed and to see the direction that that individual takes the Healthcare Authority in terms of making sure that we can fully partner with one another, the legislature and the HCA, with the very best data that we can have, so that we can have data-driven decisions, and that we can use the very valuable and as you've heard up here, limited resources that we have available to us to meet the greatest need. So in terms of what happens, I'm anxious to see who comes along to take over the captaining of that particular ship, and also to figure out better ways that, or ways that we can better partner with one another so that we're all working together towards the same end result.
Give our audience a window into how you think about legislation development. Are you still just trying to live your non-legislative life a little bit, or are you already starting to build, maybe you don't have a non-legislative life, I'm sorry. Thank you again for your service. Or are you beginning now to have sort of forward-looking conversations about legislative development for 2018?
Oh, yeah. And, so much of what we're talking about is picking up where we left off last session. There were some really important things that did not get done, and then there were some really important things that did get done, but we need to take the next step. So we made some progress on opiates, but we still have some more work to do there. We made some progress, even though it didn't come to fruition, with balanced billing. Still have some more work to do there, but feeling like we are well positioned to use what we did do in the last session as foundational work to move forward to get that done this year. Reimbursement rates are another personal hot button issue of mine, and pharmaceutical transparency at every, at every step along the way. To be looking at transparency. So a lot of things are going to be, we're going to see again, but we're going to see either the next step or actually pushed through. So it's going to be a very engaging and exciting year in healthcare again.
I see one question here. Senator Billig, let me ask you real quick before that question, recognizing that as Deputy Minority Leader, you've got 25 or 24 person caucus to help manage.
It's going to be 25.
Maybe 25 in November as a result of the election in the 45th. Let's imagine a place where the ACA does get fundamentally repealed or whittled away to something very modest. Do you believe the caucus in the Senate Democratic Caucus is excited enough about the federal Affordable Care Act to take that legislation as a model for state implementation. In other words, if the federal government walked away from the ACA, do you think there are the votes in the Senate to implement the ACA at the state level, implement Medicaid expansion, which means state funding, implement premium support, which means revenue to cover folks in the individual market at the state level? Or is that just a bridge too far?
Well, I think would be support. I think there'd be broad bipartisan support for the policy to do that. And again, like I started with my first answer, I think where the rubber would really hit the road is could we come up with the revenue to do that? And that becomes much less of a health conversation and more of a revenue conversation. So I think that there would be the will to try to get there. And I would like to think that we're going to do that, because I just think that the long-term health and viability of our citizens in our state would rely on it. So I'm optimistic that we would be able to find a solution. But I think also it would be an opportunity for us to take a holistic approach and to say, maybe it's not just replacing what we have right now that we might have lost, and can we do it in a better way? And one of the things, not just in healthcare, but in everything, when I look at budget items in particular, is to say, what's the most upstream way to solve the problem? Because that's usually the least expensive and usually the best for quality of life. So rather than just focusing all on healthcare, is remembering the goal is not healthcare, the goal is health. And are there things that we can do that will invest in health? So maybe it's healthy transportation options, built environment, maybe it's home visiting programs that help to have healthier births and to help those kids on a healthier trajectory that helps them to fulfill their potential, that saves us money in the long term from more productive citizens and less incarceration costs and lower healthcare costs in the long term. I'd like to see, if we're going to do sort of recreate it for a state level, is to not just recreate it, but to say, can we recreate it in a way that's a little smarter and invest even heavier in that early prevention, because we know that's better for the state, both from taxpayers and for quality of life for our citizens.
Good, I see we've got one question right back here. Make sure you tell us your name.
Sulani Madsen. I think there's a recognition in the room that the cost of healthcare is something we need to get a handle on, and the old fee-for-service model isn't working. So there's been a lot of speakers today talking about value-based payments as the way to go, paying for accountability, paying for outcomes. We also know the data will show that education, the level of education makes a difference in a healthy population. So why aren't we paying for education based on performance and outcomes instead of on just throwing more money at it?
Sulani has a view of the world. She's a well-regarded conservative thinker and voice, well-respected, former board member of the Empire Health Foundation. Anyone want to take that one? Representative Schmick, maybe I'll look at you first and see if you want to jump in.
I think that there's a couple things there with that question. First of all, with McCleary as a taxpayer, I'm going to ask, what am I buying? Because over the last 3 budgets, we put $4.9 billion in this agreement that we've agreed to. It's another 7.3. It's an additional $12 billion going in the K through 12 education system. And I understand the policy and I get it, but I guess as a taxpayer, and what I'm hearing from my folks at home is, what am I getting? What am I buying for that? There's some, as far as healthcare, I guess I will answer that question with a couple other questions. Any potential or good outcomes requires buy-in from the patient. And sometimes in a lot of the things that we're doing, unless we have buy-in from the patient saying, yes, I see the benefit, I'm going to do this, I want to do this, sometimes that outcome is just not going to happen. As far as the value-based system, and I'm wide-ranging here, but you brought that up, we're betting the farm on it. I'll tell you that. Every policy that we have in place now is going that way. I hope it works. I have concerns about the waiver, the 1115 waiver that we did, 5 years to prove that. I just read an article a couple days ago, in New York, where they've had a value-based system, and they said just now the bigger systems are now starting to see a benefit from implementation and as they've gone ahead. Well, that started in 1996. This is 2017. That's a lot of years. So we're looking for outcomes with this waiver. We're trying to go to a value base. It's just going to be moved so fast. I hope we can derive appropriate data so that if this is this way we want to go and it's appropriate for the future, I hope we'll have the data to make good decisions. Because that healthcare dollar, even though we've alluded to revenue and whatnot, there's not an endless pot of money in the state. And we have to make good and appropriate decisions to do as much as we can with the dollars that we have. I'll stop there.
Let me take that question and reconsider it a little differently, Senator Rivers. If I might reframe, this is not the question that was asked, but learn from the question about how do we learn from how does one system inform and educate the other? In this case, it's education and healthcare. If I were to look at education, I would say that for the last 140 years or so, we've had an education system that guarantees a minimum standard public benefit to every person in the United States. At a minimum, you get access to free K-12 education. If you want to go on and see specialized educators, you can. If you want to buy private education in the private market, you can. But at a minimum, you get a fundamentally standardized, equitable education system from K-12 or first grade to 12. Is it time to learn from the success of the public education system and inform the healthcare system and provide a basic, standardized, equitable benefit that every resident receives? And if you want to go on and purchase specialty care, you can. If you want to purchase private care, you can. But maybe it's time to learn and be educated from the question. Maybe it's time for a standard healthcare benefit in the United States. What do you think of that notion?
I think that there are nations who have done that. And they're more on the order of 10 or 11 million people. They're not on the order of the size of our nation. And when you're talking about the types of numbers that we have in our nation, I think that you are, as Senator Billig and, well, as we've all alluded to today, the revenue issue is a problem. So what you've basically sort of described is socialist healthcare policy. And if that's the direction that the people of our nation say that they want to go collectively, then who am I to say, no, it's not going to work? But I do think that it's a very tall order, and I don't want to have the appearance of cynicism. I just don't know how it works in a nation as large as the United States.
Yeah. I think Representative Jenkins is proud of me for asking that question. Do I see a hand up anywhere for the next question? Rita? Senator Billig, let me ask you, is healthcare now a policy issue that's mostly in the rearview mirror? I mean, if we assume that there are not the votes for fundamental transformation in Congress, at least for the time being, are we on to other things in the legislature? Just candidly, there's a lot of big issues. Healthcare has been at the forefront for the last, 3, 4, 5 years, but are we moving into a period where maybe healthcare, from the view of the caucus, from the view of the legislature in general, or at least the Senate, is maybe now a diminished issue?
I don't believe so. I mean, we have 147 legislators. We have the ability to multitask. So I think that there are a lot of important issues, and we are far from done with healthcare, prescription drugs, mental health, integration. I mean, there's a whole list of things in healthcare that we still can do. Some of the investments in prevention that I mentioned, and just like we're not done with education, we know from the work that we did, and I should have mentioned Representative Harris is here when I was talking about our work group earlier, was a member of that 8-person McCleary work group. We knew we weren't done. We knew, special ed, we had put in the McCleary bill, we put a study in about special ed saying we know we have to do better and we want to look at the special ed safety net. So we've got more to do in education, healthcare, and a whole range of issues. I think one of the areas that we need to keep working on is making sure that our voting system continues to be not just efficient, but to be truly open and fair and free for everybody who is qualified to vote. I could give you a list of probably 50 things that I think we need to do, and you'd probably get a different list of 50 from each of us here. So yes, we got more to do on healthcare and many other things.
Yeah, good. Question back here? Go ahead and stand up. And,
Hi, my name is Ryan Kiley. I'm with Excelsior. I had a question for Representative Schmick. You said you used a metaphor about your hands being tied behind your back by the federal government. If your hands were untied, what would that take? And then what does it take to get your hands untied? What would you want? And then what nail would you pursue to hammer away at?
Careful speaking in metaphors sounds like a smart, wise Chinese proverb, but
Just a quick example. When I talk to my local doctors at the clinic, they often talk about overutilization of Medicaid. What happens in years past, there's been proposals here, and I'm just giving one example, of a copay to go, even if it was $5, to go see the doctor for a Medicaid. CMS said, no, you can't do that, and they've been resistant to do that. That's just one example, though, from the federal side. No, you can't do that. Because all the doctors that I talk to, even if it's a token amount, you will cut utilization, and they're able then to see the more Medicaid patients who really do need care, rather than folks that overutilizing going too much to the doctor. That's a quick example of, I firmly believe that if you're going to look to us for innovation, you're looking in the wrong spot. It's the people working in healthcare, and I'm going to, my remarks to healthcare. The people who work in healthcare every day have a much better idea about innovation, what works, and allow them and the freedom to do that. I think the biggest balance there is innovation and patient safety. And that's where I think our role is, to make sure that the patient is being protected, and there's something out there that shouldn't be. But there's the balance. You don't want to stifle innovation, but yeah, we've got to protect the safety of the patient. And I think that's more appropriate for our role.
Representative Ormsby, let me ask you this overly technical question, but I'll try to simplify it as much as I can, so pardon me. On the one hand, you've got the force of the ACA that is really driving towards closer collaboration amongst providers, plans, et cetera. Some would argue it's really driving an effort towards consolidation. On the other hand, you've got pretty clear economic studies that show unequivocally, I think, that pricing in healthcare is a result of market leverage. In other words, the more consolidated you are, the higher the price for the service, for the unit cost to the care delivered. And that has no correlation to quality. I think those are empirical, that's an empirical statement. Attorney General Bob Ferguson has brought a lawsuit against health system CHI Franciscan over on the other side of the mountains, and said that its behavior, consolidation, raising prices, something relatively commonly done, I think, is anti-competitive, that it's illegal, and that they are not providing enough charity care, and that they're purposely trying to avoid charity care. Any observations on that, maybe generally, but I'm wondering, are we entering a time when we need to kind of revisit anti-competitive statute and antitrust statute, maybe at the state level, not just in response to healthcare, but in response in part to this consolidation in healthcare?
I'm the wrong person to ask, DJ, and I think Rep. Jenkins would probably be much more suited, being as that was in her community and was intimately involved in it. But I think that there describes why it's necessary to have a regulatory system. It is the checks and balances, and I think, you know, all of us have alluded to the fact that you're never done at this work. So you're constantly rubbing on it, trying to refine, hone, sharpen, and I think that's a huge component of it because so much of our financial resources are at stake. And we have an obligation to the folks that live here, and by extension, so do the systems have an obligation. And our main function is to make sure that they're regulated in a way that provides services for who we're all responsible for. On the kind of the macroeconomic side of this thing, once you get past supply and demand, which I think is what you're referring to, it gets a little muddy for me, but I would say that it was a function of the market, and there are perverse incentives, frankly, for institutions. And I think that's an example. You know, I think that this is the Franciscan system. And these aren't bad people, right? But depending on your focus, you're going to concentrate on different things. And they're a not-for-profit system, you know. So it's hard for me to make a judgment about that, other than we really do need to always rethink what our regulatory role is. And I think we use instances like that to guide us.
Representative Schmick, you want to offer 2 cents on this?
Yes, I do.
You can offer 25 cents if you want.
Well, I'm always concerned about that. As a legislator, oftentimes we've had folks come into and they say vertical integration, it's going to allow people to get in our system and therefore we're going to lower costs. Hasn't happened. So therefore, is that best for the patient? And let's use Spokane as an example. You've got multi-care in Providence. That's it. Is that best for the patient so that they can get the care at a low, at a good and fair price? I don't know. And being a real free market person, I really struggle with allowing systems to consolidate and to get one big system, because then they dictate the price. And you've seen that down in California. There's about 4 big systems that operate, health systems, and they just tell the carriers this is the way it's going to be. And so I don't know if that's best for the patient. And do I have the answer? No. If you've got it, I'd love to hear it. But I think we've always got to look out for the patient in these type of situations.
Senators, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this question about sort of these competing trends of consolidation as a result of the ACA and maybe pushback from a regulatory side, or any thoughts in general about the Attorney General's litigation here. I don't expect that you've read the suit, but I wonder if this is an appropriate expenditure of taxpayer resources to go bring these suits, in your opinions.
I think that there are, I have a little bit different perspective of this because I'm actively engaged in civil legal aid. And I know the number of people who have experienced financial devastation because they didn't receive charity care. I don't know enough about what happened at Franciscan, and I'm not saying that there was any malfeasance there. But I think that this idea that everything that we do in this sector happens just over here is incorrect. It sends ripples throughout the entire fabric of our society. And so I'm really concerned about it, and I appreciate that the Attorney General is looking at this. I want to believe that it was an oversight, or that maybe he didn't have all of the information, or that's what I want to believe, because I don't want to think that people are not informed when they receive service that they may be a candidate. Mm-hmm. But candidly, in my other job, the job that I actually have a boss who signs my check, I'm working with a lot of people who have had their meager existence, their minimum wage existence threatened because they're getting garnished. Totally deserve charity care, but we're never informed, and that's in my neck of the woods. So if nothing else, I love the idea that it's really forcing a lot of introspection, and let's make sure that those people who truly need it can get it. So I didn't exactly answer the question that you asked, but as I look at a situation like this, those are the things that run through my mind, so it might be indicative of, I just think that we have to make sure that those folks who are eligible are informed and can make a call for themselves.
Senator Billig, any observations on this topic?
No, I appreciate the Attorney General being vigilant and looking out for the citizens of our state. And this is the kind of situation I think will have an impact, not just in that one instance, but everybody's watching that. We're talking about it. Yeah. I'm sure that all of the other systems throughout the state are watching or have taken notice. And so I think that this, again, without knowing the details of it, I think just the fact that there is a case will have a positive impact on charity care throughout the state.
Yeah, good. I'll give you all one short last word. Senator Billig, we'll start with you and work our way down. What counsel or advice would you give to this audience of executives, of policymakers, or policy advocates? What advice would you give them about how to lead their organization and navigate this time of policy uncertainty?
I think listening is just the most important skill. And I see when I go into meetings with other legislators or with stakeholders, with advocates, with citizens, and that ability to not just sit quietly with your mouth shut, but to actually listen and take in what you're hearing, we're losing that. And it's a skill that is hard sometimes, especially when you feel strongly about something. And that's something I think about every day, is about trying to be such a good listener. With my other job, I run a business, listening to customers and employees, listening to constituents. My job as a senator, but sitting and listening, and I always learn something, and I always come out better for it as a leader, as a senator, as an employer, as a father, husband, all of that. So that's my advice: is actively listen the best you can.
Great, Senator Rivers.
I think that the only thing that we can truly rely on is change. Our healthcare system, as it has survived these many years, is no longer going to be that. And that's okay. We've heard the word innovation a number of times in this room here today, and we're seeing things now like remote medicine delivery by drone. With the advent of telemedicine, we see people who don't have to drive a far distance to be seen by a physician or a physician's assistant. With the advent of remote vitals, people can put something on their wrist, and through the telephone line, a provider can see on the other end exactly what's happening. So we are in a time of extraordinary change and extraordinary introduction of technologies that will help us be able to meet the needs of more people. My advice in leadership would be embrace that change, look for even greater change in healthcare delivery in our state, and don't fall prey to the temptation to enter into the partisan bickering of, if the Democrats would only do this and the Republicans would only do that. Because the reality is that on our healthcare committees, I can say the line is jagged. It's not a straight partisan line. It depends on the issue. For myself, Senator Cooter's here. There are issues that she and I align on exactly, and then other issues where we don't align at all. And it's like that with all of us. So I think that we need to raise the elevation. We need to lead the elevation about how we're going to be caring for the people in our state. And as healthcare leaders, I invite you to join me in that.
Great. Representative Ormsby, the counsel and advice you'd give to this audience?
Just to follow up on Senator Rivers' comment about, the only thing we can count on is change. And I think flexibility is, that's going to be key, because, and people, channeling your entrepreneurial spirit about new technologies or the implementation. And to follow up on Senator Billig's idea about a lot of the folks, Representative Schmick mentioned this about the people that are actually doing the work and listening to those folks. And I think that can happen internally in your organizations. I think that's our responsibility to do on public policy. And someone told me a long time ago, don't panic, because I think at the rate and the pace at which some of this stuff is happening, it can be daunting, it can be overwhelming. And I think, deep breath, step back. That's the best advice I've gotten in the legislature.
Yeah, good. So listen, be open to change, be flexible. Representative Schmick, counsel or advice to this audience?
I think that thinking ahead is vital. Do a little futuristic plan. If this happens, how does it affect my organization? Lay out some of those things. This is good, good, good. This is bad here. And be thinking ahead. What happens if something good happens? Lay out these things so that when the change does happen, which we all agree it's coming, you're not caught flat-footed and you're thinking, we've thought about that. We've considered that. And you'll be a step ahead in planning ahead and being able to adapt to our changing market.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you guys very much. Senator Andy Billig, Deputy Minority Leader. Senator Ann Rivers, Chair of the Senate Healthcare Committee. Representative Timm Ormsby, the Chair of the House Appropriations Committee. And Representative Joe Schmick, the Ranking Member on the House Healthcare and Wellness Committee. Appreciate you all being here.